Good afternoon. I'm your host, Sheri Ann Richerson. Today our topic is indoor plant care. And you get a lot of plants during the winter time. Some of them you bring in from your summer garden with the hopes of overwintering them. And some of them come along as gifts. Amaryllis poinsettia, the holiday Christmas and Thanksgiving cactuses. There are quite a few of them that are given as gifts. And proper care of these indoor plants is really important, especially during winter. Some of these plants will thrive with normal house lighting, especially if you can put them near a sunny window. Some of these plants are going to need some supplemental lighting in the form of grow lights, or what I like to use is fluorescent lights with one hot and one cold spectrum bulb. And you can tell the difference in the spectrum of the fluorescent lights by looking at the package. And we'll have yellows and oranges and red colors on them. The cool bulbs will have blues and greens and the cooler colors. And so you can put one hot and one cold bulb in a fluorescent light fixture, and that will work. Some people don't like those as well as the fluorescent lights. It's really a matter of personal preference. I like the fluorescent lights just as well as I do the grow lights. In fact, that's what I use. But back to the plants, one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have is watering. There is a real tendency to overwater or underwater. And doing either one can really damage or even kill your plant. Unless it's a rainforest plant, you don't want to leave it set in water. So what you want to do is you want to water it thoroughly. You can take it to a sink to do this. You can set it in a bathtub to do this. You can even place a saucer underneath and fill the saucer up with water and leave the plant set for about 15-20 minutes, and then pour the excess water off because, again, you don't want to leave that plant set and make that soil so saturated that it rots the roots of the plants. So the other problem is underwatering. A lot of people are not sure how often they should water, and so the plants don't get enough. The roots dry out, and many plants, once they begin to dry out, they are impossible to save. So what you want to do to know if you've got enough water, there are some neat little devices you can buy that you can stick in the soil, and they will tell you if the plant needs water. Otherwise, what you can do is just stick your finger down in, just like the tip of your finger, stick it in about an inch. If that soil feels moist, then you're okay. The top of the soil is going to dry out naturally because of the air movement, and you want that to happen. A lot of house plants that I raise, I might water every 3 to 4 weeks in the wintertime because the temperatures are cooler, and you need to adjust for this. They're not going to need watered as often as they did during the summer. And another thing that a lot of people think is that they need to fertilize every time they water. You only need to fertilize if your plant is actively growing. A lot of plants are dormant during the winter. Now, of course, your holiday plants are an exception, especially the amaryllis, the paper whites. Those are actively growing, and a little bit of fertilizer is not going to hurt them. An even better option is compost, and you can top dress indoor plants with compost. You can also mix it into the potting mix when you plant them. The other fertilizer that I really like is kelp. I get organic kelp at the feed store, and I take a little bit, I sprinkle it on top of my plants, and I mix that into the top layer of the soil. And then when I water, those nutrients go down through the soil, and the plant roots can take them up. Another part of indoor plant care is making sure that you deadhead or cut off any faded blooms. You don't want to leave those on the plant. They're more than likely not going to make seed in the house. There are always exceptions. Of course, if you've hand-pollinated because you want seed, you're not going to want to cut it off. But otherwise, when those blooms fade, go ahead and cut the flower bloom off. When the blooms are completely gone on amaryllis or paper whites, I will go ahead and cut that stem back just so it's not up there flopping around. But you do want to leave the leaves and let those die back naturally, because that's going to put energy into the bulbs to make them able to flower and look really good and do good the following year. So the other thing is, when the amaryllis bulbs or the paper white bulbs die back and they're done for the year, you can put them in a brown paper bag, just pot and all if you like. Kind of fold that bag over and set it in the bottom of a cool, dark closet. Now, you want to make sure the area is cool. You're not going to need to water that, but you are going to need to check it, especially as temperatures begin to warm up, and look for new growth, because a lot of times amaryllis and paper whites will bloom again in the summer months. And if you see that new growth coming, then you want to bring it back out of storage and you want to water it and give it some sunlight and let it go ahead and grow. Poinsettias, if you have overwintered those, then you're going to want to bring those out about now, give them some sunlight, and, let those bracts start changing color for the wintertime, for Christmas. I used to put my poinsettia in a paper bag in the closet, about September, when I would bring it in out of the garden. And like I said, leave it till about now. Knowing how to care for these indoor plants is absolutely the best way to keep them alive over the winter. And you can do this. Even if you've killed plants in the past and you get some new ones, go ahead and give them a try. Another thing that people do is they bring the plants in way too early because they're afraid of frost. Now, of course, you don't want these tropical plants to get frost because that's going to damage them. But you do want them to get a little bit cold, because it's often the cold temperature that is going to set the blooms and let them know that it's time for them to do what they need to do. Okay? So, and don't be afraid of trying some new plants that maybe you've never grown before. For example, rosemary. Now, rosemary doesn't like to get dry out, so you do need to mist that on a regular basis. And another one that's really good is the lemon cypress. We see a lot of those around here now. We didn't used to. Again, you want to keep that soil moist. You want to give that plant plenty of sunlight. And often you will find those shaped into trees or topiaries. Another thing that you can do to incorporate plants indoors, and especially into your holiday decorations, is to create a succulent leaf or wreath. And you're going to take an empty wreath form, and you're going to fill that up with some sphagnum moss, and you're going to plant those succulents in that. Some of the wreath forms will allow you to put soil in, and some will not. And you will need to submerge that wreath into something to really soak the water up and then lift it up and let it drip to dry. But that's a really, really neat way to incorporate plants into your holiday decorating. And if you don't like succulents, you can use miniature plants. There are just so many ways you can use them in, different decorations. Look around and see what's out there, see what's available. I will be happy to answer any of your questions, whether it's about holiday houseplants or something else. Okay, and now I'm going to give you a few more tips about these various plants. Poinsettias like indirect sun and temperatures no warmer than 70 degrees. You don't fertilize them until after they quit blooming, and you do not water them until their soil feels dry to the touch. Okay, once you begin to fertilize your poinsettia, which would be when it begins to grow, you should do it only once a month, okay? In March and June, you want to prune any poinsettias that you have overwintered back. You want to just prune the branches back to give it a bushy shape. Okay, you can trim these clear back to 8 inches tall if you like. You can train them into a certain shape if you like. And then beginning October 1st, you want to make sure your plant receives 6 to 8 hours of bright sunlight and 14 hours of darkness each night. Okay, and as I said, to get the darkness, you can put it in a paper bag or a cardboard box in the corner of your closet. Just don't remember to take it out so it can get the sunlight during the day. After 8 to 10 weeks of that kind of treatment, your poinsettia is going to begin to show color on its bracts. And the color is not flowers. Those are actually bracts. The flowers are the little yellow things in the center of the bracts, yellow or green. I've seen them both. Okay. The Christmas cactus. There are both Christmas and Thanksgiving cactuses. And the way you know the difference is when they bloom. Some will bloom for Thanksgiving. Some will wait till later in the year to bloom. And this is a plant that really does benefit from the cooler temperatures. Not frost, but cooler temperatures, okay? That helps it set its buds. Okay, and these are easy to keep alive from year to year. In the summertime, just take it outside, hang it in the shade someplace, make sure it gets water, and then, like I said, leave it outside until it starts to get cool, and then move it into a cooler room in your house with plenty of light, like in a window or something. Okay, and the biggest mistake that people make with these is improper watering. So you want to water early in the day, and this is true for any plant. You want to make sure you keep the water off of the foliage. And with the cactuses, the holiday cactuses, you need to keep the soil evenly moist. Okay, you don't want it soggy and you don't want it dry. You want it just moist. And do not leave this plant set in a saucer of water. That will cause the roots to rot. So make sure that you dump the excess water away after you've gave it a good drink. Okay, and if you follow these tips, you're going to have these plants for many, many years to come. Okay, what you cut off of the plants, you can put in your compost pile if you like. Just make sure it's not diseased. Keep an eye out for pests, especially when you bring plants in. We had an orchid that we brought in, and it was filled with ants. So what I did, instead of repotting it, because it was looking really good in the pot it was in, and I didn't want to uproot it and try to get it to grow into a new pot this late in the year. So what I did was I got a gallon-sized bucket, which was big enough to put my pot in. I filled the bucket with warm water so I didn't shock the orchid. And I submerged the pot and all right down in the bucket. And I had to make several water changes because the ants were just coming out like crazy. But eventually I got all of the ants out of that orchid bark. And then I sprinkled the top of that with a little bit of diatomaceous earth. I'm sure that just washed off being outside all summer. And no more ants. I have that setting up under a grow light. And as I said, it's looking really, really good. So I have some other orchids that I had just bought, and I had to repot. And, of course, you know, when you do that, it takes a while for them to adjust. So I have those orchid pots sitting down inside of a 2-gallon Ziploc bag. I have a saucer filled with bark in that bag as well to help hold in some humidity, and then I mist. The key is to keep them doing well enough through the winter so when I put them back outside in the summer after our last frost is over, that's when they'll really take off. I just don't have the perfect conditions inside my house for those, but they do live through the winter. Another great holiday plant that a lot of people don't think about is the African violet. And it does really well on a sunny windowsill. It is easy to care for. It does not require a lot of potting up. The one key to it is don't get water on the leaves. They really, really resent that. So avoid doing that. And just, like I said, look around, see what unusual or unique houseplants you can find that are in bloom during the winter months. Hoya is one that I'm thinking of. And some of the flowers on Hoya don't smell very good, but they have other ones that smell like cinnamon or chocolate or other scents. So if you find a plant in bloom, you might want to smell it to make sure that you like the smell before bringing it into your house. Inspect the plants, both the ones you bring in from outdoors or ones you bring in from your greenhouse or conservatory, as well as any that you buy for insects. Okay, submerging plants underwater is a great way to wash insects off. Another way to deal with it is to pick them off by hand. Keeping your plants insect-free is absolutely the best way to go, because once those little buggers get started and they get a hold on that plant, it is really, really hard to bring the plant back. If they have done a lot of damage, there's not going to be a way to save the plant. So we don't use chemicals here. We just use the diatomaceous earth. We use the kelp, which gives the plant everything it needs to thrive. And by using the kelp and keeping the plant healthy, it's better able to fend off any insects. The diatomaceous earth slices up anything that is creepy crawly with a soft body. So that takes care of that. And like I said, prevention really, really is the key. I don't recommend using soapy water unless you test an area of the plant first, because a lot of the dish soap formulations have changed over the past few years. And I have found that some of the dish soaps, even ones that we've used in the past, will burn the plant leaves. So another thing that I use, and this is really great for those little flying gnats that you get, is a combination of cinnamon and garlic. Now, it doesn't smell good, but you sprinkle garlic powder, not salt. You want the garlic powder, and you sprinkle cinnamon on the top of the plant soil, and if it gets on the leaves, that's okay too. And something about that combination will get rid of those little flying creatures. I always welcome questions, so do feel free to leave some comments in the comment box or shoot me an email with your question. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and all of the other social media sites. So, we have a caller coming in. Just a moment. Hello?
Hello, Sheri. It's Kate.
Well, hi, Kate. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you? Talking about houseplants?
Yes, we're talking about indoor plant care today. Do you have some tips?
Oh, well, I used to bring my rosemary and things like that indoors, but they're still outside because it's been so mild.
It has, hasn't it? This has been just an interesting year for how long you can leave plants outside.
Well, I always think they do a lot better outside than inside because they've got the natural air circulation and things like that. So I leave them outside for as long as possible.
That's exactly what I do, and that's what I was just telling the listeners was, you don't want them to get frosted on, so you might have to move them inside at night, but you want to leave them out there as long as they can.
Well, that's right. And Rosemary, of course, can go down to probably about mid-20s, but, I know when we were in the South, it stayed out all winter, but so long as you've got good drainage, that really helps it. Makes a big difference.
It does. And, have you found that your rosemary is less likely to dry up? You know how it gets when it's in the house, by leaving it outside longer?
Well, I think the shortest time that they're inside is better for them, but I tend to keep them in a really cool room, kind of an unused bedroom or something like that, rather than having them in the kitchen where it's damp and warm and generally not enough light for them. So it's almost like you put them into dormancy rather than active growth.
Yes, and I think that helps so much. And does your rosemary bloom?
And usually it blooms in about January or February, if you keep them kind of reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, and aren't those blue flowers just beautiful?
Yeah, I've done them once or twice, quite a while. And I'm trying lemongrass this year as well.
Oh, lemongrass is wonderful in the house.
Yeah, and being a grass, it's really kind of, it's a simple one to really to bring inside. And, being a grass, I think if you chop it down a little bit, and then there's always lots to give friends as well, come next spring. And again, if you try and keep it dormant, I think it really does help.
It does. And, I know you have cats, and I was going to tell you on that lemongrass, cats love that plant. I don't know why, but...
Yeah. But, it's one of those things that I've done once or twice. So, it's... I like to give it to friends, and then, it really does come up really big back next spring, which, as long as, but I think lemongrass particularly doesn't like any frost. So, that one does have to come in a little bit earlier.
Yeah. And do you do the bulbs like the amaryllis and the paper whites?
Not paper whites because my husband doesn't like the smell, but I do have an amaryllis that I'm trying this year for the first time. And the other thing I've done, I have forced a poinsettia that I kept over from last year. I have forced that into redness, and that is just great. It's the first time I've been able to do that.
Those are just absolutely wonderful. I just absolutely love overwintering the poinsettias. And, I said at the beginning of the show that about now, because it's so warm outside, I'm thinking it's October and not the middle of November. But those are really, really nice. Now, is yours the plain poinsettia, or do you have one of the fancy ones?
Yeah. It's one of those things that I've been doing. This was the first time I actually tried it. And, it's the leaves themselves that seem to turn color, which I thought was rather interesting. I know that they're called bracts, but the fact that the leaves themselves went from green, I thought they were just dying, to be honest. They were going brownish and they turned red, and I thought, oh, I've done it.
I remember the first poinsettia that I successfully did that with, and I had the poor thing in an unused room in the corner, shoved up against the window behind all these other bigger plants. And I went in and I thought, I see red back there, and I pulled it out, and sure enough, and I was like, wow, that worked. So,
well, I used to try doing it in a box, and I used to forget to take it out, and then I'd forget to water it. This time, because I've got a study that's just off the kitchen, I chucked it into the cupboard at the back. And every time I came in, I thought, oh, I can remember it. But it only took probably about 2 to 3 weeks. I thought it took ages to do this, but I think I had it conditioned for maybe 2.5 weeks, just taking it in at night. It was great.
Wow. Well, Kate, we have about 2 minutes left, so would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about you and your website?
Well, my website is katecopsey.com. And I also have a radio show called America's Homegrown Veggie Show, which I'm hoping that Sheri's going to be on one of these days when we organize it.
Yes, I'm sure looking forward to that. So, and when is your show, Kate, for our listeners?
It's at 10 o'clock Eastern Saturday mornings out of America's Web Radio, which is an AM station down in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming over today and talking with us about indoor plant care.